How is the staying at home and shutting down? And
well, for me, it's not really been a big deal personally, but it's it's one of those states that has a strong political lean toward libertarianism.
Oh boy!
And so it's don't tell me what to do. I just won't. I'll try not to do any harm to you, but because of the asymptomatic nature of the virus, there's no way to really tell if you're doing harm to someone else or not.
Well, that's a great point.
And I'm surprised that our governor is being moderate.
Uh-huh.
He seems to be handling it relatively well, not offending too many of his Republican constituents, but also not alienating the more the few liberals that are here.
Right.
So,
amazing.
Yeah, he's got a tough row to hoe, and I think he's doing all right.
Are you ready for me to go live, or do you want to say anything off record that we don't?
Oh, just to get me, before we go live, by the way, we can both go to Facebook Live on our own individual pages. Is that right, or does it have to have one feed off of this? Do you know?
No, if you want to do this one, post this one live. Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I wasn't sure the best way to push it live. But yeah, we'll do that. Just so to give you an idea of what we've been doing, we've been trying to, since we're doing, distant, virtual churches,
right.
Church meetings, we normally have, like an adult education hour. And, we're not reading the same book right now. We're what we're doing is we are listening to other people. And so we're trying to create these Sunday school kinds of lessons, but to let you know where we come from, we were a church for about 20 years. And then through a series of transitions, we kind of got down back to a core group again and decided to replant. And so part of our replanting was to develop a new language to, stay somewhat evangelical, but in a different train.
Yeah, nice.
We're Anabaptists, and so we kind of aren't very comfortable with most evangelicalism. But we do kind of like the Bible, and we like Jesus. I mean, that's just part of that goes together. But we've been reading, Brian Zahn, and we've been looking at Peter Enns, using his materials. Yeah. Keith Giles is a friend of ours that we've interacted with. Richard Beck is a friend that we've interacted with. And so we're trying to find a new language, really moving toward that kind of Christus Victor rather than the penal substitutionary language, and really working on giving our people a language for engaging communities and the place we live, still with that kind of evangelical thing going on. But we find ourselves completely on the progressive side of politics.
Yeah.
In a state that isn't. And I think at some point I was Googling for progressive politics, evangelicals, and that's where Vote Common Good popped up, somewhere like that. So,
well, it's a short search history when you're looking for that.
Yeah, so that gives you a little background of where we are, what we've been going through. And what
have you been there Have you been there through that whole cycle, the first 20 years and the remake? And
yeah, in fact, my wife and I were invited to come with a core group that had already begun meeting to be the planting pastors. And when we got here, we found out that their only motivation was to not be the church that they had split from.
Oh.
They really didn't have growth. They're,
yeah, sure.
growing a church in mind. We really didn't find that out till we got here. And in fact, in those early years, because that really was kind of a non-starter, we did house church. We did a variety of other things. We had a small group. We tried multiplying house churches. And that's when I got involved with a lay loan.
Yeah, Leyland. Yeah.
And I think that's probably where I first encountered. I'm not sure if you and I were ever in the same place at the same time, but I worked with a lay loan for about 4 or 5 years, and spent a lot of time in the Twin Cities. Because are you still in the Twin Cities?
I am. Yeah. I still live here. I used to be a pastor at Solomon's Porch, but
right, and that's where the lay loan kind of thing came along. Yeah. And then at some point, I started working with Pat Kiefert over at Luther Seminary.
Of course, yeah.
And so I think you and I have had some overlapping worlds, but I don't think we've really ever met.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad we've rectified that.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
So that's a little bit of background of where we are and what we've been doing, what we're trying to do with these recordings. We're trying to keep them roughly to about 45 minutes. Now, the other thing I didn't mention is I had put my podcast to sleep about 18 months ago, and now beginning to think, well, maybe it's time to wake it up with these different conversations and interviews I'm having. So
yeah, for sure.
So we'll probably put that out on podcast. We're going to keep it all the same, but it's called the All That's Holy Blue Collar Podcast. Nice. And so eventually I'll put this. I don't like editing, so I tend to throw it just up there.
Man, I'm with you. I'm with you on all this. I'm right there. I even do these. I even broadcast these things live because I'm like, I don't know if what you really want is 9 or 11 people being listed at the end of the show, like on an NPR show, that tell you about how they made all those sounds disappear. All the power to you. I'm not doing that. I don't even know how. I don't want to.
It's thank you, Audacity, and that's about it. So.
That's right. That's right.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and go live.
Great.
That's all right.
I'll do the same.
All right.
Great. All right. Hey, everybody. I'll just talk to my people. You can talk to your people. I use this crazy little, this crazy other little feed called Mevo to make this work. Hey, so I'm being podcast interviewee this time, not the podcast interviewer. So that's Craig. He's leading the show. I'm just here to be the podcast guest. So thanks, Craig.
Oh, my pleasure. It's good to finally meet after 20 years of being familiar with you and having overlapping worlds in the, right. I guess what used to be called the emergent church.
Right.
And I guess now the church has emerged.
Yeah, that's worth a conversation in itself sometime about what we were all up to at that time. We used to bicker a lot back in the old days about whether you were talking about the emerging church, which a lot of people use the phrase, or the church emerging, right? And so one's
verbs are important.
One's a verb and one's a noun or an adjective, and it makes all the difference in the world. We always thought it was about this emerging phenomena happening inside of faith communities, not a church that was reaching a goal. So, but we clearly lost that fight. We clearly lost the argument, and other people won the day. So
there's a certain irony that after emerging, we're now all holed up in our basements and our closets.
I mean, who would have thought that this kind of reality that a lot of us talked about, the failure of the systems and structures, and they weren't going to serve us well, would actually come and play out just so on point.
Exactly.
Really quite disturbing.
Yeah, I want to make sure I'm not getting any feedback here. Okay, that's right. Okay. Yeah, I wish I knew more about Zoom, because I keep on getting those alarms that pop in and out with little doorbells. But eventually I'll figure out a way to weed those out. So. Well, thank you for taking the time. I looked at your event schedule, especially for Vote Common Good, and you are very busy. There's a lot of you've got a lot of conversations going on in a variety of different locations. Well, not probably all the same location, your basement or your home or wherever you're working from.
Yeah. Sometimes I'm on this side of the basement. Sometimes I face that way. Tonight, for our lectionary, I'll face that way, where there's a whole backdrop set up over there. But today, I'm in this location.
Well, that's
ridiculous.
Just for some background, what is? A couple of questions though. What is Vote Common Good, and how did you get there from having been a pastor? What was that transition, and why this?
Yeah, we started Vote Common Good officially in January of 2018. June of 2018. And it was a direct response to a lot of us as religious leaders and people who wanted to be in the public space of faith and civic engagement, believing that Donald Trump was a unique threat to the well-being of this planet and to the health and emotional and physical health of people on this planet or in this country. Never did we imagine that others would see as clearly as we did what a hazard he is to the health and the well-being of people in this country. It's just been proven out in the last, 168 hours that the man truly, if you listen to him and do what he says, you really could be putting yourself at harm. And so we started Vote Common Good as a way to ask religious people to stop the reelection of Donald Trump. And we formed this as a nonprofit group of a certain kind. It's what's referred to as a 501c4. Not to bore people with tax code, but in the tax code there's different kinds of nonprofits. 501c is the nonprofit charitable arm. Then there's a C3 and a C4 option. C3 are churches or C3s. Lots of other YMCA is a C3. Other groups like that.
Oh yeah, thanks for the little ad there.
Yeah, Team Idaho, baby, Team Idaho. So. They are and C3s have certain limitations put on them. About what they can do politically. They cannot speak for or against the election of a particular candidate.
And that's an issue I really want you to go ahead and take some time to speak on, because you can do that as a C4, but it's something that I as a pastor can't do in my congregation as a C3, if I'm understanding that distinction.
Yeah, well, it's curious whether you as a pastor can or you as an organization spend money on doing such and such. I am on the side that you can do a whole lot more than most pastors do. Most pastors don't talk about politics unless you're on the religious right, and then you do it every day, all the time. Like you think Pastor Jeffries from Dallas is not talking about election? Of course he is. You think when the evangelicals have a meeting in their building called Evangelicals for Trump that Donald Trump is at, they're not doing? Of course they are. Progressive and left-minded and not conservative types anywhere in that sphere tend not to do it, not because of the legal requirement, but because we tend to not want to offend the one or two people in our congregation that seemingly will listen to us on politics, but would never listen to us on the other issues that we talk to about how to live your life. I mean, this is my great comment to church leaders. And they're like, well, I don't want to tell people in my church who to vote for. I'm like, do they listen to you? You people in your church? Because I've been a pastor for a long time. No one's like, hey, you know what I should worry about when I go to vote is what does Doug think about this? Like, the influence I have on their life is one of myriad influences in their lives. And the over extended sense of importance that pastors have about their influence in their congregation cracks me up, right? I'm like, these people, whom I love and try to influence, and they influence me. They're not just walking along as some sort of, followers of every word I say. So anyway, yeah, there's a lot more you can do. Yeah. So there's a lot more you can do. But good. A 501c4 is the kind of nonprofit that can talk specifically about election outcomes. That's not all you do. We're not a PAC. We don't spend money on candidates. We're not a political operating arm. We exist for the common good. So Vote Common Good works great for us in that kind of language. But we are able to say that this particular candidate puts the common good at harm. And that's what we're doing. And look, we're not boosters for the Democratic Party. I think everyone should vote for the Democratic candidate in this next election. I ask them to, if for no other reason than to stop the reelection of Donald Trump. But we are specifically wanting to make sure that Donald Trump does not continue to inflict this country and this planet with his lack of ability to be an effective president. And as a pastor, like it can sound really personal and sound like I just hate the guy. And people have told me that they think that's what I'm doing. They're like, hey, you gotta ratchet it back a little bit. I think you're falling into the category of the haters. And in all honesty, I don't hate Donald Trump. I believe that Donald Trump is, as we all are, the beloved child of God, the salt of the earth, the light of the world. But look, Craig, not every light of the world should be the president of the United States, and he's one of them. And he should let his dim little light go shine doing something else and stop bothering the good people of this country by continuing to fail day after day as president. This isn't personal about him. It's personal about the damage that he's causing because of his inability to perform this job duty. And this is the place where I wish there was not a code in our charitable contribution category of the federal government that says you can't speak about issues that affect the common good. You have to be muted around the election of a candidate if you're going to pursue the common good. It's put in place as a muzzle. This is the one place where, with my conservative friends, I agree. It's referred to actually as the Johnson Amendment. And it
Right.
has that name because it was Lyndon Johnson who became the president as a congressman who put this into place, because then they wanted to prevent churches from talking against for talking for the stopping of segregation, for civil rights. So Johnson was on the other side of that issue before. He put this into place to keep pastors from agitating to bring an end to civil rights. And why pastors on the liberal side of the persuasion or progressives continue to push forward on the Johnson Amendment makes no sense to me. It's not in our Constitution. It's IRS tax code. It's wrong-headed. It should go away. We should all be pushing against it. The one place where I could join together with my conservative pastor friends and say, let's bring an end to the Johnson Amendment and tell pastors that they don't have to not mention, because what pastors do is they talk sideways about it all the time. Right. And so it's not honest, and it's not helpful. And then it's this way of sort of under the guise of being non-political that you just become sideways about it. So all that to say, vote common good, doesn't have to worry about any of that. We travel the country. We try to tell stories of people who voted for Donald Trump in 2016 and won't be doing so in 2020. And we want to engage people in that conversation and help give them an off-ramp from voting for Trump. And we've been interviewing many voters who are in that category, and their stories are fascinating. They're very similar to one another. But that's what we do. And so we travel the country now, traveling it digitally, and with a Monday cooking show and a Tuesday electionary, and a Wednesday or Friday pray for the president campaign. We're going to start a Thursday house concert and all kinds of stuff that we do.
And I was just reviewing the blog on the website, Vote Common Good, and was looking at the prayer. You had a prayer in there that was also reflecting on the Sermon on the Mount.
Yeah. And
just kind of went through these different elements of the Sermon on the Mount, really focused at the president, but also not focused at clobbering the president. It was this attempt to be both critical and gracious at the same time.
Huh.
And I thought that's hard to do, first of all. But I thought it was also really laudable that I think there's perhaps maybe you can fill this in or say more about it. Not only are you trying to provide information, but it seems like you're also trying to model. How do we critique without becoming, I guess, overly partisan or anger, reactive, that kind of way.
Yeah, we're trying to do. We're trying to live up to the standard that we all want from someone else, right? Is to speak the truth as you see it. I saw somebody wearing a shirt when I was on a social distancing walk, but meaning by myself. Right. And she was coming the other way. She looked like she was a trainer. She had a group of people. She might have been training on a walk and so on. And she had the shirt that said, "Be yourself, others will adjust." I kind of like that. So we're trying to model this idea where you truth tell from your vantage point with and it's not too much to ask people to have a certain level of humility in that, like, you could be wrong, but also to not become so bound up with, well, what could I possibly say about this? And look, again, there have been a lot of presidents, people that ran for office that I haven't supported. I've never done anything like this. I've never given up my previous way of life, gotten on a bus, tried to raise millions of dollars to travel around the country and ask religious people to serve the common good by stopping the election of someone. In fact, hearing myself say that, it's like you've become a crazy person, right? Like you're a middle-aged man in your basement talking on the internet, and you've fully jumped the, I should move to Idaho if I want to fill out the stereotype here.
You'd be welcome out here, by the way. So
That's right. I call this my bunker of resistance, my underground bunker of resistance. So this is outrageous, right? What are we doing? But to the earlier part of the conversation, this is what some of us were trying to do in the emerging church world, was we were trying to say that your faith ought to compel you to the benefit and blessing of others. That's the language we used around Solomon's Porch, the church that I pastored started and was part of for 20 years, that, we want to be a benefit and blessing to the world. Well, just because someone tells you that politics isn't the place where you should be a benefit and blessing doesn't mean it's not the place you should be the benefit and blessing. And in this particular case, because we use a representative form of democracy based on counting votes to establish who is going to be in what positions, we are all obligated into a world in which we can choose to influence that world or not. And I want people of Christian faith to be influencing that world, not for their own self-interest. And, we like one of our next prayers that will come out, I think is going to be based on 1 Corinthians or on Philippians 2. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit, but consider others better than yourself. Like there's a way of organizing yourself in which what you're approaching going forward is the care for the collective. I think it's what Jesus would call the kingdom of God. And I actually see Jesus as a very political character. I did an Easter sermon for a church where I talked about the crucifixion and resurrection as a political act and a political response. That when the gospel wants to say that Jesus doesn't stay dead, what he's saying is that the government's power under Pontius Pilate to kill Jesus and under the orders of Herod are not going to be followed. It's an act of civil disobedience to see the resurrection from the dead. I know some people don't want to see anything in Jesus that way. They don't want to see the Sermon on the Mount. They don't want to see the teaching. They don't want to see the demonstrative way of the miracles in that way. But I think that's exactly what they are. I think they're pushbacks to a political system that was different than our political system. And I don't think we need to tell stories of martyrdom. I think we need to tell stories of engagement. And so we can leave the sacrificial system behind, as Jesus called us to, and we can step forward into something more generative. And our particular broken form of democracy is what's available to us. And I think the idea that people want to sit it out is hard. And that's hard for me. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, because while I'm not an Anabaptist, just because I'm not much of a joiner, the Anabaptist tradition, if I somehow I could mix it, Anabaptist with Eastern Orthodox in sort of a 21st century way, that's the kind of faith I'd like to live.
That's a nice one. I like that. Yeah.
Yeah. Wouldn't that be great if that was around?
That reminds me of Brian McLaren's book, Generous Orthodoxy, where he linked Anabaptists with Anglicans. And I thought, well, I like that one too.
Yes, that was insightful call that he had. So I don't know, because the Anabaptists have said, consider the other kingdom. And as I've personally grown, I've realized, hey, I have a lot of identities in my own life. I have the identity in my family that, we're popping in on Zoom calls with two sides of our family and then with our kids. And so sometimes I'm the brother, sometimes I'm the son, sometimes I'm the dad, sometimes I'm the husband, sometimes I'm the uncle, sometimes I'm the cousin. Like I have all these different identities, and they're not all the same, and they don't all play out the same in every context. And our faith is really no different. I think that we find ourselves in different identities at different moments and are called to different acts of responsibility. And I would say in this moment, 2016, 2020, that is sharpened in clarity for me about what I need to be doing. And as an Enneagram 8, it doesn't bother me to say to someone else, you should consider this for yourself as well. Like I'm not going to, if I thought it would do any good to tell you what to do, I might tell you what to do. I just don't think that's good for you or for me, and I don't think it works. But consider making the stopping of this presidential administration a goal. I think it's a good thing, and I think more people should be doing it. I was lightly stumping around for Barack Obama in 2008, but nothing aggressive. I thought, there's other people that have that in their purview, and even in 2016, if I'd known Donald Trump could have won, I probably would have been doing this back then. But I deceived myself that there was no chance.
Yeah, I think we were all kind of on that page, like, oh, this isn't going to happen. But I think one of the things I hear you saying, and I think it fits with some of the challenges historically we've had as Anabaptists, is somewhere deep in our DNA. Now, I didn't grow up Anabaptist. I came to it through the conservative, then American Baptist Church, and then landed among the Anabaptists and went, oh, this is my family. But I grew up Presbyterian, actually, and so I had this kind of mutt behind me. But coming to the Anabaptists, there is this tendency that when you find something in society or culture that you find that you can't participate in, rather than engage it and change it, you become sectarian, you separate, you become, an Amish farmer in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, and you just have your own little, maybe not little, but you have your own commune. It's almost this segregation away from the world rather than engagement in. And I think one of the most vital things for me was engaging Anabaptism at a missional level, to push that mission back into our communities where we live, the people we work with, and it picks up with the identities you described. I am not only an Anabaptist Christian. I mean, that might be a core piece, and some identities are, more significant or kind of more bedrock than others. But I'm a high school track coach. I'm a neighbor. I have all those different family relationships that you alluded to. I share in those as well. Father, husband, brother, son. And in those identities, it begs me to be engaged in those things rather than to separate from.
Yeah, well, totally. And look, I don't know enough about Anabaptists. You could teach me on this one, but I believe that every religious movement and the denominations to me tend to be best understood as ethnic religious movements from a certain time frame. That the time when Anabaptists sort of found their place, what was happening in the world was the creation of nation states, and that countries were taking on a particular tonality. And even in the United States, there were certain regions that were for certain groups of people with, certain leaders. And we even named some of our states, like Pennsylvania, after this. So what you had was the way you engaged in the nation state democracy was to create a community of people who thought and believed in a particular way. Then you as a group would then relate to the other groups in that way. And that was the zeitgeist, that was the milieu, I think, that was going on. And Anabaptists just haven't transitioned from that to being in a more stew-like mix of, well, not everybody on our block is like us or in our state, or like we're mixed in this thing together, which frankly is a very new human experiment that we've been doing for, 250 to 500 years.
Right.
In the world and in this country. It's not entirely sure that all of our systems, work well with it, or that it's even the best way for it to go. I don't know. We're all figuring it out. So it just feels like any of our traditions, no matter, and I'm not saying some are better than others, but they're all created in a space and time with a set of imaginations that tell us how we ought to organize most effectively. And well, I've spent a lot of my life trying to ask people to sort of let that go so you can grab onto something new. I'm not entirely sure it makes any difference, because as soon as you let go of that and grab onto something new in about 20 years, as you and I know, having both started churches, that could be 2 decades long, you're like, oh my gosh, I'm living the imagination of some people from my 20-year-old self, and they won't let me free from what I wanted 20 years ago. Yeah. And so it doesn't take long for the human mind to sort of latch on to a right way of being. So we have to then instead develop the skills to adapt no matter what system we're in. And the lack of adaptation, I think, is really the problem in churches and religious communities. And so if someone's a convert religiously, a convert in their diet, a convert, from never running track. And if you're a high school track coach, you're probably meeting kids every spring that you're like, give track a try this year. And they're like, I don't like to run, right? And you're
and
trying.
Then they show up the next year and they go, got a convert. Yeah.
Got a convert. And you're like, it takes a lot of forces to move someone to a new way of living and being. And frankly, as we know as pastors or as social organizers, there's not a lot of incentive to create a stage in which people outgrow you. Like, it's funny, as a pastor, I would find myself feeling like I really want you to grow and to develop as a human being, as a person, and all of our systems, like Jesus said of the Sabbath, are made to benefit humanity. Humanity doesn't exist to benefit our system. And all of this needs to be for your growth. But please don't grow so much that you don't need us anymore, or don't grow so much that it takes you away from us. Like, there's kind of this desire for you to grow, but not ever to grow enough where you don't fit here. So we have this tug and pull that we're just not very very good at. And it's hard enough to do that with one person, like a child or a spouse or a lover. It's even harder to do that with, like, I don't know, a family of somebody else's family and, somebody over 20 years. And so I'm not even sure that churches make sense anymore. I mean, this has been a very deep question I've had for my entire life because I wasn't raised in religion, so I've never had a hard wire into churches are the savior of the world. I'm like, no, churches are the mean places where mean people go to tell you that they're better than you. That's pretty much my starting point in life on churches. I've grown a lot since then, but so I'm not sure that churches even make sense, or roles like you and I have had are serving humanity at all. I don't know.
I think this one of the fellows that you and I probably have overlapped with is Alan Roxburgh.
Yeah,
and Al would frequently and continues to speak about continuous change, and adaptation. And I have a hunch that this moment that the churches are going through around the world, but primarily North America, where we really love to hold on to a model and say we got the technique, we got it figured out. This moment, this pandemic, is a wonderful opportunity to go, okay, what does church really look like?
Yep.
And I think, it's not going to change everything, but also normal is gone. I don't think normal we're going to get back to. So it's forcing us to ask some questions about adaptation. What is the church? What does it look like? What good is it? And how does it engage?
Yeah.
So I think it's a great. It's a terrible opportunity. I mean, I think the church can have some creative influence on the outcome.
I was in a meeting one time, and a guy shared something very similar to this. He said, "Hey, I worked for a company that made drill bits, and it was one of the premier drill bit making companies in the world. And they would sell to lots of brands, put their brands on it. And a new president came in, and he said, he got all of us kind of vice presidents and middle managers together, and was talking about the changes that they thought needed to happen in the company. And the new president said, 'What is it that we make here?' And people would say, 'We make drill bits.' And then he said, 'Well, say more.' 'Well, we make top quality drill bits, and then we make the best drill bits in the world, and we make.' And he said, 'Might I suggest that what we make here are holes? That what drill bits exist for is to put a hole in something. Now, we might make holes with water in the future. We might make holes with lasers. We might make holes with whole new kinds of drill bits. But we're not making drill bits. We're making a drill bit to be used to make a hole.'"
Right.
I thought it was he was talking about churches, basically saying,
yeah.
Do you think you exist to have a church? Do you think the point of church is church? Because if it's the point and not the tool used for a point, you're doing something else. And I just think that was difficult for the people in that drill bit company. I think it's difficult for all of us in any place that we find ourselves, because to recognize that the very actions that we do are in service of something else, and thereby we could become less useful than ever before. But
we hold on to our thing to keep doing the thing that we do.
Yeah.
So we make drill bits. All we're going to do is make drill bits, even if in the future there are better ways to make holes. But no, we don't use water pressure. No, we don't use lasers. We make drill bits.
We make drill bits.
Yeah. And that's probably the motto of all those organizations that no longer exist.
Yeah, totally. And you can see in like the people work that people like you and I do, the reason the thing you end up thinking about is all the people who really benefit from the drill bit, right? To just break this metaphor down too far. And at some point you say to yourself, and maybe you've experienced it recently, where you're like, if we make this decision we're about to make, which we did at Solomon's Porch about 1.5 years ago, that's going to mean that some things that are super important to some people and have become an incredibly crucial part of their life is not going to be available for them. And my friend Dwight Friesen, who you might know, I'd imagine you know Dwight. Dwight has said many genius things in his life. I only remember one of them. And it was that most of us don't fear change. What we fear is loss.
Right.
And if we don't recognize that when we bring change, we're also bringing loss, then we're not understanding what people's emotional struggle is. And I thought he was really right. So he was saying, "Oh, don't just do change without loss. He was just saying what people are responding to is not the change, it's the loss that they're going to experience moving forward.
Attend to that, or be aware of it. Yeah.
And man, and this is why I stay in evangelical, in the sense that, like, I stay in the Jesus story, because it is a just brilliant way of telling all of this. The whole passion event, and don't hold on to me, for I have to go ahead. Like, all of the narrative there is this human narrative, right? Of which the systems that we create to hold and to propel and to compel that narrative in the world wants to be about. And it's just shocking how often we are finding ourselves having to do the big thing as well as all the little things. And it's just really hard. Like, it's hard to get up every Sunday and come up with, 7 to 27 minutes worth of things to say that are going to, be in service to people. One of the things I like to say, I have a group that I run a master's degree program for, and I'm going to say this to them on next week when we have this online course, is, look, there's this old critique that, most preachers have like 5 things that they have to say, and they just keep saying them over and over and over again in different ways. I said, take that as a challenge. Try to get from 2 things to 5. That would be great. And don't think you have to have something people don't need a fresh take from you every 168 hours. You can be like someone's favorite album, and be that place in their life that reminds them of what it is that you've done before. And I just think we've
that's liberating.
done a lot of things with our roles. And I mean, I can reflect on this 20 years after or 30 years after, and 6-8 months out here, that, there's just a lot of things that we burden ourselves with that are, but it's also how we manage our anxiety. And I don't know if you've realized this, but I just think all of us find a different way to sort of manage the chaos of the world. And so we do things, and we come up with stuff, and we look around our lives and all of this, whatever your this is, that's how you manage your discomfort and your passions that aren't playing out. So if we can just see everyone's actions as some version of them trying their best to get along, maybe it helps a little. I'm not entirely sure.
So I want to steer back a little bit to vote for common good, but I think that last comment just kind of is a good segue. You really want to see the best in other people, that they're really trying their best.
Most of us, anyway.
Yeah, but there are times when the best that they have to offer just isn't good enough for what is required of them.
Totally. Thanks for bringing up the President of the United States again. That was a great segue. That's awesome.
And so say a little bit more. I want to move toward. Mm-hmm. We've only got a few more minutes here, but I want to make sure that we include probably about 10 more minutes, if that's okay.
Yeah, I got nothing but time.
What is the pledge that Vote Common Good has, and say a little bit about that pledge. And I mean, not too many people would think, oh, that's a wonderful piece of scripture that's great for weddings. Why are you talking about politics?
Yeah, well, we created what we call the Love in Politics Pledge, and it's a voter's pledge. It's not a pledge that we ask candidates to take. It's a pledge that we ask voters to take. In fact, there's a whole lot of groups that want to really put a lot of pressure on candidates. I'm like, what? Wait. Just having been someone who's been a leader, like every candidate, everybody who's elected, they're also managing their anxiety. They've also made a set of promises. They're also living inside of a story. Like, good grief, you're just wasting your time trying to hold somebody to a new standard. The best thing we can do to change our policy is change our policymakers. So that's sort of the cleanest way. So we have a pledge for voters, and we call it the Love in Politics Pledge. It's based on 1 Corinthians 13. As you mentioned, which is this love passage that is often utilized at weddings, because weddings in the United States and a lot of North American culture is one of the few places where you can talk out loud about a commitment of love between people in a culturally appropriate way. So we just bang that drum until we put a hole in it. Where I think the original context of that writing was not about a man loving his husband, or a woman loving his wife, or a man loving his wife, or a wife or husband. It was about how a community is going to live with one another and live with the world, right? And in that context, and because we've just lacked the capacity to talk about love as a driving force for our world and society. And I created this thing, but it came out. I was working on a book before Donald Trump ruined the world called Let Love Lead. And I was trying to suggest that love should be, for religious leaders and for others, the primary driving force. And there's something curious, if I can just tangent for 1 minute, that got me into all of this and why we ended up with the Love and Politics Pledge. And that is in a lot of the churches that I know and work with, they have this whole system of protection of the clergy so the clergy doesn't harm the parishioners.
Right.
And so there's boundary training that goes on. And part of the boundary training is that the pastor has to be separated from the congregation. And there's certain things you can't do or say. Like lots of people won't hug, or there'll only be an arm hug. And there's certain things you won't do and certain things you won't say. And I love you is one of the things a lot of these trainings teach you not to do. Right. So here we have a community and a pastor whose job it is to admonish people to love one another as God has loved you, that we admonish us to love our enemies, to be like God and love the entire world. But I can't say I love you. Now that is whacked out to a point that is under some because we can't figure out a better way to protect ourselves than letting love be the first, second, and third call. So in 1 Corinthians 13, it says faith, hope, and love, and the greatest of these is love. And if I have not love, I become like a clanging gong. And then it lists out these 17 phrases, some of which might go together, some which are separate, about what sort of a description of love. It's kind of a ... at the end, like love is all of this. And we thought that love should be the guiding force in politics. As a bonus, and on a side note, you read through 1 Corinthians 13 definition and description of love, and it sounds like the opposite of Donald Trump's Twitter feed on any given day or week. It is just incredible, and we've done that. So we ask people to make a commitment to make love their driving force. One of the people on our team named Troy Jackson at our events, when he's speaking, we have different speakers all the time. He'll say, on the Love and Politics Pledge, he likes to do it. And he says, I just wanted you to take a look at the description on the back. Love is patient, love is kind, love is gentle, love is not rude. It goes on like this. He said, could you insert Donald Trump's name in there? Donald Trump is not. Donald Trump is not. Donald Trump is not. And you watch people just be pained by the fact that that's not the case. Now, is that just judgment against Donald Trump? I sure hope not. I hope it's also, hey, could you insert my name in there? I would like to say, Doug is not rude. Doug is not self-serving. Doug is not doesn't keep a record of wrongs. Doug doesn't delight in evil, but Doug rejoices in good. I hope that that's the case. That's what I want for myself, and why we can't hold one another to this standard. So the Love and Politics Pledge is based on that, and then it's 4 things, real quick, that you will use love as the standard by which you hold to which you hold your elected officials. We don't think it's too much to ask someone, if they're going to serve the common good, to comport themselves in their public and professional lives in a way of love. Like I watch people in retail. I watch people at a Jimmy John's have to act in a certain way according to the guidance of their job. That the president of the United States is not held to a standard of not being an asshole is unbelievable to me. Unbelievable. So that we hold them to a standard of love in their professional and public lives. I'm not even saying all in their personal lives. I'm not saying dig around, find every old text that they wrote to someone or find a mean thing someone said to someone else.
Right.
But just when you're doing your job, could you comport yourself in a way that comports with love? And then you would speak up against anyone who won't as a political leader, and you'll call them to change and accept them if they do. That you will support candidates, but regardless of their political side, who do comport themselves in a way of love with your thanks. You'll recognize them. And fourthly, you'll ask politicians to hold one another accountable, and no more of this, well, I wouldn't tweet it that way. That we ask the industry of political representation to raise its standards of self-discipline and use the standard of love to do so. We don't think it's all that much, but it blows people's minds, right? Like when they're like, why would we not do this? Why haven't we been doing this? Why is someone not bringing it up? And it's not that we stumbled onto a genius idea. It's that people have known all along. This is how it's supposed to go.
It's supposed to get. Now that picks up on something that, as I've looked at your materials a little bit, I mean, I haven't gone probably as in depth as
you should.
many, or as I should, or as we will in the future soon. But I don't see promotion of particular policies or candidates as much as I see a very proactive way to engage in politics, to engage in love, to have a wise critique. It's not about the organization is not anti-Trump. It's pro-love and pro-loving engagement.
Right.
And as such, it's not really a partisan thing.
Yeah, it shouldn't be. Look, the people that make it partisan are Republicans, not to be defensive or anything, but I voted for Republicans before, for president and everything. You know, it's not about that. But the people for whom there is no movement that they think any critique of Donald Trump is somehow a partisan critique. It's like, right. Oh, come on, just it's more than that.
Change the partisan. The partisan is Trump or anti-Trump. It's not even Republican Democrat anymore.
No. So yeah, you're right. And look, we don't. Our motto is, make the common good your voting criteria.
Right.
Now, embedded in that is our notion that what the common good is not definable to a list.
Okay.
That goodness is best explained by what it's best understood when you see it not in action, right? What's not good? Well, stuff that's bad, right? And I know that can seem, now this is what requires some maturity from people. This is what a spiritual person grows into, is it's not about a list. This is Jesus' teaching. I didn't come to abolish the law of Moses. I came to fulfill it. Right. I think this is that same idea. I didn't come to say you shouldn't have a list of things you think are good. I'm just saying there's more to it than just that list. So each one of us knows what good is. And we begin with the assumption. Now, this is where we become like a Quaker, that we know that there's a light in you, and that light is what should be your reference point. And that light of goodness is what you know. And goodness is always conditional. This is where I become a postmodern Quaker. It's a conditional response where you are in a place to make a decision about what is good. And I'm not saying that I'm not buying into this old, I have a choice between evils and nothing's good, so I just have to choose the lesser of two evils. I think that's utter nonsense. I think the only way we end up with that is by somebody trying to pitch war. Yeah, and yes, I'm talking to you, Augustinian theologians in church. But it's also just people have given up on the good, right? Right? What's lesser than evil? Good. Try do some good. And so we don't tell people in politics what is good. We say, you know what good is. And look, if voting for Donald Trump, you can find the good in that, go ahead. But don't tell yourself that good is not an option. Do good. Believe in good. And the thousands of people I've heard say to me and say publicly, well, I didn't know what else I was going to do. There were no good options. Yeah, but there was a not good option. And it was that guy. Right. And if that hasn't played out, and now look, you could say, well, I think it was also Hillary Clinton. Well, then don't vote for either one of them. But not voting for her didn't mean you had to vote for him for the love. Yeah. Now, a lot of my friends that want Joe Biden to be president and like me wanted Hillary Clinton to be president, they will say, yeah, but if you give people an out and tell them they don't have to vote for the Democratic candidate and they write in someone else, then you're going to get this third party thing. And okay, look, if that's the price we have to pay, that people maintaining the choice of good and not being like I'm stuck with two evils, is that they're going to vote for a third party. Well, great. Let's overwhelm the system with those who can connect the good to this candidate and the not good to another candidate and do what they want. And look, it's not that I want to run around and try to convince people that Donald Trump is not good. If Donald Trump doesn't convince you that he's not good, there's nothing I can say that's going to convince you of that. Guy's like a self-cleaning oven. He does all the work for you. Can you get to a point where you will act in such a way that will match what you know is good and what you know is right? My friend Tim Keel said a long time ago. He said, "I believe, all these friends. I believe in the whatevers of what is good. Whatever is good, whatever is right, whatever is praiseworthy. Think about these such things." And he said, "I love the whatever, all of it, whatever it is. It's not some things and not others. It's whatever is good. Just spend your energy on that." So we take the approach of the common good. And then we also do some biblical stuff. We say in every tradition they have a sense of common good, which is caring for your neighbor, blessing those outside of your own group and tribe. And so we have a nice description, and it's laid out in there. I think it's worth people reading and preaching. And I hesitate to say this because I don't want people to think this is all we're doing, but we're trying to put together a series of resources with our lectionaries, which are biblical reflections for this election, 7 to 9 minute sermons and prayer, things that we put out, like you mentioned, the Pray for the President and the Love and Politics Pledge, and what we think the common good is, as resources for churches who don't know what else to say and talk about. And they're like, oh, I can't talk about politics. Right. We're like, well, I don't know. Maybe you could just have the people in your church take the Love and Politics Pledge. Could you do that? And then you begin to realize that this fear of, I don't want to offend someone, doesn't fit the gospel very well, and certainly doesn't fit our political system very well.
Yeah, that is such an important point for some people who say, well, I don't want to talk about politics. Well, then you pretty much just have to close the Bible.
That's right.
I mean, the Bible is just chock full, almost on every page, of some comment on the oppressor, or how to live with those you don't agree with, and living together is a politic. It's a
the body politic, we tend to call it.
It's what you do. I was listening to one politician, it's Cuomo, Governor Cuomo, saying, I don't like being called a politician. I would rather have somebody say, this is what it means to be a politician.
Totally.
Yeah. Rather than disclaim it, redefine it, because that word's not going to go away.
No. And look, I get it. Like I play those games and have played them for a long time. And I don't want people calling me a pastor and a minister. And I want to have more flexibility than what the social construct of that name means and all the rest of that. But I don't know. I think I was kind of bullshitting a lot of that. And I still don't want to be called a pastor just because I think it demeans the role of pastor. It takes the pastoring that I think is a communal act and puts it into an individual. In a politician, though, it's like, I don't know, there's only one of those slots, like to be a governor or to be a congressperson or to be a senator or a mayor or a city councilwoman. Like, only one of those. It's you.
Yeah.
But I think we all should see this. And I'll tell you, if we haven't all found the log in our own eye through seeing the gigantic speck in Donald Trump's eye, then what good is it? Right. I mean, at the end, we're going to save some people, and we're going to protect this planet, and we're going to stop this madness, and the fever will break, both literally and metaphorically, and this guy will be not bothering the good people of this country any longer. But if we all just think, wow, what was that? I don't know how that happened. How'd that come about? Right. I don't know. Let's just move on. That's not, I'm all for moveon.org, but I don't want us to move on.org on this thing. I don't want us moving on. I want us to
do it again in another manifestation.
I'll tell you that whoever wrote, old ancient Hebrew proverbs and said, a fool repeats his folly the way that a dog returns to his vomit. It's been a human impulse for a very long time that we will do it again.
Yes.
There's no doubt about it. And when we do, we will have to recognize that we've been a fool, and let's be wise and not foolish, and help one another to be wise and not foolish. And it's just really, really hard. Because look, nobody's better at this than someone else. Some people just have a few more skills or a few more temperamental leanings or a few years more of practice. But we're all beginners at this. We used to say around Solomon's porch, we're all beginners at love, and we're trying, and we're doing the best we can some days, and we're not doing the best we can other days. In fact, my friend, now here's one who I don't know if you're going to know him, Stan Mitchell from out of Nashville, at a church called
that was not part of our overlapping circle.
Church called Grace Point. He tells. Can I tell a little folksy story that I'm borrowing from Stan? Stan said he had a mentor of his that was really important in his life when he was a young man, and a few years later, decades later, he reconnected with this guy, and the guy had gone from being a fairly significant, high-profile person to having to stay at home and care for his wife, who had Alzheimer's or dementia or something. And he went to him and he said, Phil, what's it like for you to now have gone from this high platform sort of thing you were doing with all this influence to now, the last 5 or 6 years, living at home and basically being a in-home caregiver to your wife? And the guy was Scottish, and he said, so I'll do a terrible Scottish brogue, but he said, when I die, I'm going to stand before the Lord, and the Lord's going to say, hello. And I'm going to say, Lord, I did the best I could. And the Lord's going to say, no, you didn't. But I love you anyway. Welcome home. Isn't that great? I did the best I could. No, you didn't.
I love it.
No, you didn't. Don't worry about that. This is not, I did the best. Some days, you know what? We don't do the best we could. Some days we half-ass it. Some days we mail it in. Some days we're cruel just for our own pleasure. Some days we're just snarky because we chose not to take the high road. It's not about I did the best I could, but there's this invitation to a home that you're going to live in. So around Vote Common Good, like, I know it sounds like we're just trying to be better than everybody else, but our friend Dan Dietrich, who does work with us, he wrote this song called The Hymn for the 81%. I don't know if you've heard it on YouTube and so on. Yeah. I mean, it's just an incredible moment of insight. At the end of this song, where he sort of critiques the people of his own tradition for putting kids in cages and defending the president, he moves to this part at the end and he says, come home. Just come home. You taught me to love the sinner, so I'm trying to love you now. Come home. And that's this real sense. Like, that's the thing I think that's in the faith that I want to hold. I think it's the thing in the American imagination. It's this thing we're trying to push forward to is, of course, error and mistake and not living up to constantly. But then what, right? It's that moment of, could you pursue the common good then? Or do you only do it if you get all your ducks in a row and everything is just right and everything's locked in, everything's going according to plan? And I'll tell you, I mean, most of our churches have trouble with this. Most of our relationships, most of us, like the internal relationship you have in whatever, inner family life conflict that we all have going on is barely able to survive this. So There's days where I think, in light of all that, we're doing pretty good. All right, that was a lot of rambling. Sorry about that.
That's all right. I've enjoyed having this conversation with you after a couple of decades.
Just in time, we're those kinds of guys. You're like isn't that an Anabaptist thing? You just wait for the time to be right. And...
No, I think it's more of my. I don't know. It's just more of my number 5 on the Enneagram. Oh. I just kind of lurk and watch and wait.
Yeah,
and then I can speak out of my deep wisdom.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you are. And hey, what's the name of your church and where in Idaho for people who are?
So we are in a suburb of Boise, Idaho, Meridian, Idaho. I think it is percentage-wise the fastest growing community in the United States. And we are presently called Emmaus because that's what the core group we began with called it. Before we even came as the planting pastors. And now we're just, as we go through our replanting process, that name is up for grabs because we find that most people can't pronounce it. And even most Christians don't know what it refers to. Right. And so it's a great story in Luke 24 that came up in the lectionary this last week. But for now, we're known as Emmaus Christian Fellowship. Uh-huh. And we're in the replanting process looking for people who want to jump in and
Well, I have somebody I'm a huge fan of named Stephanie Milani, who lives in that area. I will tag her in this post and send her your way, unless you know her already.
No, not yet. No,
she's the best.
Yeah, those days with Alayla created a lot of relationships and connections that I've found keep overlapping as the years go by.
Yeah. Well, hey, this is really great. Thanks for chatting.
I appreciate the time that you've provided us, and we'll definitely be directing our folks to take some look at Common Good, and we're going to be that's going to be part of our Sunday conversation.
Oh, good.
This week. So.
Well, and we were planning to bring our bus tour through Idaho, and we got stopped. Right. We're not done yet. We hope there's a time when it's safe to travel, because that means the country will be in a place of safety, and if it is, then we're going to get back out and we'll come to Idaho.
Well, that's right. That's what I thought. Oh, hey, you're not coming in April. You might have some time on your hands. So.
Yes. But I don't know about you. I feel busier now than ever in my life, partly because it's just Zoom call, and conference calls, and we just keep setting up all these things. And
things for me have shifted gears because I'm not coaching. The coaching is done. no sports. And, but that freed up time that's easily got eaten up by other things as well. So
no, it's like a Miss Pac-Man, it just comes by and I don't know, they just gobbles up anything there is. Every little blue dot that's time just gets chewed up.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Doug.
Hey, my pleasure. Greg,
well,
nice
talking
to
see you and look forward to hear more.
Right on. See ya.
All right. Bye-bye. Let's see is right. Let's see. Yeah.
This is what everybody does. Then let's see. Look around. Hey, that was great. Craig Morton, Emmaus Community Church outside of Boise, Idaho. Take a look. Enjoy. I hope you enjoyed the conversation, everybody. Onliners, podcast people, right over there. Hey, see y'all tonight if you're still watching this, God bless you. See you tonight for Electionary, 7 o'clock Central Time, coming to you from right over there.